Yeah, so firstly, I mean, thanks so much for agreeing to have a chat to me. I've started recording, so thank you for that. I have no idea if it's going to be useful for people or not, but I actually watched an interview yesterday that I found really helpful. So I thought I may as well, if it's not going to be helpful for people, then I don't have to post it. And maybe I'm adding extra pressure on myself by doing this, but we'll see how we go. So yeah, I wanted to have a chat to you. I guess it might be helpful for you to have a little bit of background about me before we sort of get into sort of what I'm looking for. But I have come from a science background, so it's so funny that we can see that we've both been checking each other out on LinkedIn. So I did do a science degree and did my honours, but I guess I've always been a little bit unsure if that was the right path for me. I've got interests in education, and I've always been interested in humanities and history as well. So I became a medical representative for a year and a half because I wanted to sort of still have a science component, but embrace more of the communication skills that I feel I have. And I didn't feel like that was really being utilized when I was in the lab. And I felt a little bit like I didn't fit in, I guess. And through the medical rep work, I felt like I wasn't challenged enough in that role, and exposure to that industry sort of indicated that it's a very conservative industry as well. So I would have to stay as a rookie rep for sort of 4 or so years before I could progress. And I've always been quite ambitious. So to me, that wasn't worth it. Then I took a year off and went and traveled around Italy. Again, sort of because I felt like just something wasn't really fitting right. I was missing something. And so that was, I guess, embracing my humanities and art and history side a little bit more. And then I came back and I missed science. So I went back and I became a research assistant, and then committed to a PhD. So now it's complicated to explain, I guess, because I started my PhD 4 years ago. But I did a year and a half full time and then took intermission for a bit over a year, and have been through a lot of personal growth and a lot of change in that time, and have completely upended my view on the world and what I want, and my view of success and what I would like my life to look like. So I returned to the PhD part-time at the start of last year, and was hoping that I could still make it work for me with that new idea of success. And that seemed to be working for the last year or so, but with COVID-19, it's kind of thrown a new hurdle into the mix. And I work with mouse models a lot, and they can't really be bred safely at the moment because there's the possibility, particularly in Melbourne, of our animal facility being shut down with a moment's notice. So I'm a little bit restricted, and there's a possibility that my PhD will just continue to get extended because of these delays that are outside of my control. So I'm really looking at the options that are available to me now. So I've got a really good supervisor team, and they've encouraged me to sort of reach out and speak to some people in some areas that I'm interested in. So that's why I wanted to sort of connect with you, because the work that I do is sort of lab based. So I often don't get to interact with people a lot, and I find we call it basic science when it's sort of at the fundamental cellular level. So that's at the level that I work in the lab. And I find I was drawn to research because of the human applications of what I can do. So a lot of the time, my honours project was related to the bacteria that infect cystic fibrosis patients and how it's able to adapt to that environment and develop chronic infection. My current PhD project is related to the development of type 2 diabetes, sort of looking for how we can maybe find some better treatments for that because it's such a complex disease. So even though it's got those human applications, what I actually do day to day is so far removed from the applications to people that sometimes it just feels like it's not enough for me. I think I need something where I really am in contact with people a little bit more and can sort of see that what I'm doing is going to be directly impacting people, because what we do in the lab, if you're lucky, you might make a discovery 30 years after you've started. So I'm sort of looking for something ideally where I get to work with people a lot more. I love having discussions with people and learning people's stories. And I really like what the Centre for Social Innovation does. When I was reading through the website, just so many keywords were kind of jumping out at me. I was like, this is exactly kind of what I'm interested in. And as a scientist, it's really difficult for us to get access to what the opportunities are outside of academia, because our role models are all obviously within academia, and they only have a limited view of what's available for someone with our skills. So yeah, I'm really interested in how you got to where you are. Obviously we've taken very, very different routes, but I'd love to know what sort of drew you into the consulting, which is how I sort of first found you, and then into the Centre for Social Innovation, I guess. And the other thing that I'm interested in, perhaps if we have time, is how hiring managers in your field would view someone with my experience and my skills, which I can mention a little bit more of if you need some clarification.
First of all, like, so many things that you're sharing get me quite excited, because I think there's this separation between the kind of work that we do, so ethnographic work and focusing on the social determinants of health, and then the scientists who are actually looking more at the physical and biological determinants of health. So like what's actually happening in the chemistry of the body.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is a massive area for potential innovation. Absolutely. Because I mean, it's just to kind of focus, and I know that the way that science works is you have these kind of clinical trials and everything is very contained, and you know, that's just not the reality of people living in the world. There's so many different things and conditions that get in the way of their health. So I've just done this big project around chronic conditions, and 12 random people who nominated themselves through Facebook, so completely random, were interviewed by researchers who we trained. So people who were also living with multiple chronic conditions, we trained them to be the researchers. Okay. They went out and had these conversations with 12 random people who also had chronic conditions, and a theme emerged that wasn't even in the conversations that we had set up. So we had done a lot of framing through the literature we had read and through the evidence that we had collected, and basically this theme of trauma came up. Every single person who was interviewed had experienced some form of early childhood trauma or abuse. And that was not even in our scope of thinking. Because we had peers interviewing peers, they could go so much deeper and talk about things in ways that we couldn't do. We essentially removed that researcher subject guide and I guess hierarchy, power difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And to have that come up, and to come up basically as the strongest theme, that every single person who we spoke to had experienced something like that. And for none of them have to have equated that to having any impact on their health, and none of our peer researchers who also then turned out to have had experiences of trauma when they were young.
Mm-hmm.
None of them, we were like, well, what's going on here? So then we started exploring that, and we came across a whole bunch of research around the link between trauma and the and yet none of that actually impact. Yeah, well, and it makes so much sense. You've got the body as a system. You have a system which, I guess, the endocrine system, which creates all these different responses to stress, and that has an impact on the physical organs in the body. And yet, in the scientific world, none of that is pulled together. There's not this sense of what's happening outside the body has a major impact on what's happening inside the body, and yet the effects of what's happening outside the body has a major impact on what's happening inside the body. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that research teamed with with scientists who are working in that field, so bringing together that kind of qualitative research that we did alongside that would open the field of medicine to so many, and the field of science to so many new insights. And it's very hard because we work in very different ways, so bringing that together is not always the easiest thing to do. But just hearing about a scientist who's really interested in speaking to people, and then you talking about your basic science and where you're thinking, what I could do could have an impact on this person way down the track. I'd be really interested to know how going out and speaking to people who are experiencing the problem that you're working on in really deep and meaningful ethnographic research ways would influence the way that you're actually conducting your science and the avenues through which you're looking. And then
I love that you said that. Sorry, do you want to finish and then I'll go?
Oh, I was just thinking, so we focus on systemic intervention. So that means not only looking at solving the immediate problem in front of us, but actually looking at all the things that are actually causing that problem in the first place, and where are the highest leverage points within that system to create broader change. And I feel like the exact same thing could be done in science. So I guess I'm just saying, there's this, you want to come into this world, but I think there's also a big opportunity for our world to go the other way. And I actually think the real richness is when we have people from lots of different realms starting to work together to really take that systems perspective and build their awareness across, I guess, mental, physical, social health and well-being to really tackle health challenges from multiple angles, but using much broader data than we currently do.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I met an exercise physiologist through an outdoor rock climbing club that I was a part of, but he works at a holistic exercise physiology clinic. He runs it actually, so he will sit down and have very close conversations with his chronic pain clients about what's going on in their life, what's going on outside of the physical treatment that he's giving them. And often he would discover that they were having marital problems or something else that was contributing to their condition, or negatively impacting their ability to take on board the exercises that he was giving them. Yeah. I guess, yeah, I mean, from my own experience as well, I just had no idea how much the mental side of things can impact your behavior and your approach to things and your physical health. I mean, I feel kind of really naive for not understanding that, but I was under such a huge amount of stress. And when it all came to a head, I had to have all these blood tests because there was a possibility that it would have impacted my heart and my kidneys and, all this kind of stuff that I just was not aware that stress can do to you.
I think through this project, that's the real learning that I've had, understanding that, stress is a good thing. It's a mechanism in the body that tells us to be safe, it keeps us alive. chronic stress, on the other hand, is not a good thing. And actually, modern life is making humans much more susceptible to chronic stress than we were previously, because of the complexity of the work we're holding, the pressures that are put upon us by, having to conform to what we believe society expects of us, or how we should look, or how we should feel, or how much joy we should have in our life. We've got so much comparison that we didn't have before, and all of that creates this really hyper competitive environment, which there was human beings have always been competitive, but we were competitive in our own communities. And once you kind of knew who the dominant leaders were, you kind of settled into where you were in the pack and you accepted it. That's not really how society works now. We're all about constantly improving, constantly growing, constantly learning, and that pressure creates a state of chronic stress. And chronic stress, where those stress hormones are in our system for prolonged periods of time, have massive impacts on our organs and on our well-being. And yeah, over time, that is what develops chronic conditions. And there's this incontrovertible evidence that is actually what creates the chronic condition. And yet that is not how our health system deals with chronic conditions, because we have a rationalist model where, the longer you're a doctor, the more specialized you become and the less you know about everything else. You're always looking at your one particular thing, and you're not actually paid or incentivized in any way to work with other people to understand the broader issues. And so as soon as you've got multiple chronic conditions, you are just, you can't work because you have to see so many specialists. You can't, everything compounds and makes it impossible for you to live a happy life, even though you should be able to.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I could talk to you forever.
And I've not even started answering any of your questions, sorry.
No, but so coming back to, I guess, it's so interesting that you brought up the point of, you wonder how me having conversations with people that are affected by the condition that I'm researching would inform my research, because that's exactly what I wanted to do. When I was struggling, probably for, even a lot of the first year and a half, to find meaning in what I was doing. I know that diabetes is a huge problem, but I couldn't connect what I was doing in the lab to the people. I don't know, there was some sort of disconnect there. And I kind of started to wonder, I looked into volunteering at sort of Diabetes Australia, and maybe getting more involved with people that deal with the condition. And I looked at some online blogs of people that were talking about what their day-to-day was like, and I was doing a lot of this stuff in my own time, because we don't get incentivized to do that, but it was a personal interest. And I was kind of do people that are dealing with all of this, they're trying to calorie count, and they're potentially having to inject insulin, and they're probably going to all these appointments, and they're taking various different medications, and some of those have got side effects, and then they've got normal life and relationships and work on top of all of that. Do they really want another drug? Is that really going to be the thing that's going to help them? And that was, it's hard to know where my research would end up, because it's exploratory. So it's possible that it could help with earlier diagnosis or prevention or treatment. We don't ever really know, but, we're always taught, because of our funding model, to kind of project the real life impacts that our research could have. And often that means kind of suggesting that we could come up with a potential treatment. So I really kind of wanted to interview people with diabetes and kind of find out what their needs are. I really wanted that needs-based research, because I think within basic science, Yeah, you see a real world problem, but then obviously they're so complex, so you have to focus on a very, very specific part of that, because even though I really only work on one protein, that can span like into so many different areas, and we face so many delays, you know, technically and biologically, that even when you're working on a very specific protein in the body, it's just huge. It's too much to manage. So I understand, like, you know, why a lot of these other avenues aren't kind of explored. But I actually broached with my supervisors when I returned at the start of last year whether I could maybe incorporate a psychosocial element. And I spoke with a PhD student friend of mine that works in public health, so she does work more with people. And she sort of said to me, I can see you doing this kind of thing, like some sort of multifaceted. You're looking at environmental influences, you're looking at psychological influences, you're looking at biological influences, and trying to bring that all together to see how it impacts people and can potentially lead to diabetes or complications with treatment. And so I kind of wrote up this plan and I pitched it to my supervisors, and they were super supportive actually. But it would have been a huge hurdle at the time. I would have had to take on new supervisors, like find like additional supervisors that had the expertise in qualitative research that mine didn't have. And I have never been exposed to that type of research. So I spoke with a few PhD students in that area to just get an idea of what would be involved, because it's so easy from the outside to be like, oh yeah, interviews, like that's easy, but it's not, obviously. There's a lot of skill that goes into framing those questions and making sure that the questions are designed in a way that's safe and considers all of the elements. And then when you're doing that analysis, the different themes, you know, I'm sure you know all of this, but it would have been a huge hurdle for me to incorporate that at a time when I was still really and I still am to a degree recovering from something quite significant.
Yeah.
So I haven't incorporated it, but it's still there, like that and that's why I'm having these conversations now. It's like I've developed such a fascination with the power of the mind, just through my own experience. And because I'm a researcher, when I was going through this experience, I've done a lot of research and asked a lot of questions, self-educated on a lot. So I've, you know, listened to podcasts and read things and watched things and spoken to people. And yeah, it's just making that interest stronger and stronger and stronger. And I think it would be remiss of me not to sort of like follow that to a degree. I don't know exactly how I'm going to do that, but that's why I'm having these conversations.
Well, I mean, I think pertaining to your work, there have been ethnographic studies. I know two in New Zealand that were focused on diabetes specifically. So understanding, and those were specifically with Maori populations, done by a company called Innovation Unit. Well, I think they're now called Innovation Unit. They were called I'd have to check, but I'm sure I can get hold of that and send it to you.
That would be really helpful.
I guess the challenge, and this is where I guess ethnographic work becomes as complicated as science. What we understand is that ethnographic work really is a place-based type of research. So, and often culturally based as well. So when you are when you're doing ethnographic research, the conditions that exist in Sydney versus Auckland are very different.
Yeah.
And then the way that those conditions are felt by different population groups, whether they be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander or culturally and linguistically diverse, they actually have a completely different experience because their mental models process this conditions differently. And so, I've just done a big piece of work around domestic family violence, and we've developed a model which is having great success with the dominant white culture in Australia.
Yeah.
We're now having to basically say, will this model even work in an Aboriginal context? And the only way we can know is actually to start from scratch, and actually train Aboriginal people who are experiencing domestic family violence to go out and speak to people also experiencing domestic violence. We already know that culturally, if you leave your family because you're experiencing violence, you are actually shunned from the whole community. So if you're a female who chooses to do that in an Aboriginal setting, so there's this massive, that's completely different to white culture, and so we need to be really aware that any ethnographic research is place and culture based.
Yeah.
And that is, I guess, where our complexity comes in. So you're saying, I'm focused on this single protein and there's all this variation. Then there's all the variation of place, there's all the variation of culture, and taking into consideration who you're wanting to work with and what is really important in this space. I do think you would find quite a lot of ethnographic work has been done on diabetes from a social determinants perspective. I'm trying to think who else. There's been a study done in Queensland recently called Culture Well, which was looking at just well-being and how different cultures within one area perceive well-being in different ways. And as such, any communication that went out that was not direct, was not specific, was going to impact on those different cultures in different ways because of their actual understanding of what well-being means was completely different. So yeah, it's just really interesting work.
I guess this is where I guess this complexity is why these solutions haven't been made before, because it seems like you need to look at things from so many different angles. And like you've said, you really need that multidisciplinary research for any sort of like large solution to be made now. Like from what I understand from the biological perspective is that a lot of the drugs that were going to be made have been made. Like a lot of the blockbuster things that came from natural herbal ingredients and all that kind of thing, like the easy finds have been found, which is why we're sort of struggling so much now to come up with new things. But then society has evolved so much, it's become so much more complex, but now there's all of these different factors that are influencing the biology. And maybe now the next level of solution is not going to be those easy find quick biological fixes. It's going to be more of this massive multidisciplinary approach, and I know they've tried to encourage that. Our funding models, they really try to encourage multidisciplinary research, but the way that the industry is currently structured doesn't allow for that so much. Like I know governments have tried to build research institutes that are in hubs with hospitals to try and encourage communication between clinicians that work with patients and with the basic scientists. But in reality, there's still this massive gap. And at least now they have clinician researchers that sort of do both, but they can then only have a limited amount of knowledge and a limited amount of scope in these two areas, as opposed to specialist clinician working with specialist basic scientists.
At the end of the day, policy is what incentivizes what actually happens. So until you have a policy which incentivizes a different way of being, we're not going to see this kind of work happening. So yeah, it's just interesting. Riffing off of what you're doing, there's so many exciting ways you could look at it, but at the same time, it is exceptionally hard to do that right now, to the point where it will have impacts on your health should you try and pursue it, because it's going to be that hard. So yeah, so we have to be realistic about that as well. I was just reading yesterday, so I also lead organizational development at TACSI, and I was reading about the impacts of well-doing on, in the social space, on well-being. So it's like this, like as you're doing work for other people that gives you a lot of purpose, it has a positive impact on your well-being. But because of the conditions that the type of work we do, so usually it's incredibly complex work, and usually it's incredibly underfunded. And as such, you feel this incredible pressure to do your best possible work because you're working directly with the people experiencing the problem. And at the same time, you're not actually funded to do it properly. And so this becomes this pressure cooker, and the rates of burnout in well-doing businesses are 10 times higher than any other type of consultancy. So we're having to really juggle that the whole time. I'm sick at the moment, and I know that is a sign of just the fact that over COVID, we've been helping, every single one of our clients find ways to deliver their services online, continue operations, and the pressure of being able to do that feels so immense, because you know that at the end of the day, if you don't do it, someone is actually going to miss out on the support that they desperately need. And so that direct impact does have an impact, and you end up ignoring your own needs. And I really believe that people in crisis can't help people in crisis, so we have to find ways of maintaining well-being in that process. And that's part of the organizational development work that I'm doing. How do we have a culture where we don't let our colleagues continue working when it's past 5 o'clock, where we encourage them to take breaks, where we say we do what we can with the money we have. We can't keep going beyond that, because first of all, it's undervaluing then the work, which is then creating a false market. But then it's also having massive implications on burnout rates within the organization. So
there's so much I could say on
that. Sorry, but let's get back. I feel like we've not even started on the questions.
No. Like I said, I feel like I could talk to you forever. So you do the consulting work for Euan Black?
Not anymore. So I am now full-time at the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. Euan Black was, I still have the ABN. I still do maybe 1 or 2 projects a year, but they are all for clients I had previously, so I don't take on any new work. But essentially, I studied graphic design at art school. And I wrote my dissertation on human-centered design. I was really interested in the power of design beyond, I guess, creating products or, creating something beautiful to look at, or aesthetics. I was always there's a much deeper power to design that I can see. And I was introduced just through a lecture to human-centered design and became absolutely obsessed. And so basically went away and read every book that I could find on human-centered design, started speaking to people like you are right now, and speaking to people who were practicing it, how they were practicing it. And over the course of maybe the 12 years after I graduated with my Bachelor of Design, graphic design, I really just started moving more intuitively towards human-centered practices. So when I'd be doing branding for an organization, I'd be like, hey, who are your ongoing customers? Can I speak to them? And who are the customers who have used you once and then never came back? Would it be okay if I went and spoke to them? Who are the customers that you want that you never seem to get? And so I'd start actually exploring the market around different businesses, and just going to speak to those people. And through that, you learn just such interesting things about the way that a business is perceived, the experiences that people have had interacting with that business, and then how that has changed their behavior. So, you know, if they've had a really great experience, they find it very hard to go to someone else. If they've had a poor experience or caught someone on an off day and, you know, there was rudeness that happened or something like that, they'll literally, like that, even if they've been working with someone for years, just change direction. And so what I found is, you know, doing all this branding work, branding's very aspirational, you know, it's all about a business stepping into who they want to become. And oftentimes their organizational design wasn't actually set up to deliver the aspiration of the branding or the ambition of the branding. So you'd have this like company that looked $1 million, but actually everything in the back end of their business was setting that brand up to under deliver. And so actually, you know, it's almost a case where I would say you're better not to rebrand, just to keep people's expectations where they are, until you've got, you know, your business working at a level which can actually deliver to the ambition of the brand. Or, as I liked to do it, let's work on both at the same time. So let's actually like do things, test them, and keep on evolving through iterative processes until you've got your business and your brand kind of singing together. Mm-hmm. And that was really where I started Heart Black from. So it was really, you know, let's do what I call deep branding, which was basically human-centered branding. And through that, just became fascinated with organizational development and how we organize and what supports humans to do good work together and what gets in the way of that. And so actually I came to TACSI. My partner got a job in Adelaide, so I was like, right, I have to move. Do I really want to keep doing what I'm doing, or is there more that I want to learn? And
I'm taking notes, by the way.
Oh, that's all right. And I guess I had just always aspired to like really understand what design is capable of. Like, I just wanted to know how deep can it go? Like, what can be designed? What can't be designed? And that led me to TACSI, who at the time were actually looking for an organizational development lead. And they had no luck. So they had actually had like 3 people take the job before, and it just wasn't working. And so when I came and I said, okay, I've been working on organizational development, but through a human-centered design perspective, they were like, what? Okay, that sounds right, like far more in alignment with what we're looking for than currently. And I said, well, the problem is I actually want to do social innovation. Like, I've been doing this organizational development work for 7 years now, and I love it, but it's always been for commercial organizations. I want to understand how to design for people who really need it, you know, for social impact. And so we actually struck a deal. So I spend 50% of my time doing organizational development work and the other 50% in social innovation projects. That's been 4 years now. And in that time, you know, I've gone from knowing literally nothing about so it's not even human-centered design that we practice at TACSI. We practice co-design. And so that is the facilitation of design alongside people experiencing the problem. Okay. So we design activities and we design facilitation. We don't actually design solutions or the outcomes of those activities. Those are all created by people experiencing the problem. So that was completely new to me. I had never done work like that. You know, it was always like I'd go away and learn from people and then come back to my studio and do the design work in isolation. And then if I was paid to, I would then go out and test it with those people again. But more often than not, that is not how I was paid. So it would just be like, go out, learn from, create a couple of insights, and then design something. When I came to TACSI, you know, like the built into our process is multiple loops of learning. So when we go away and do that really deep ethnographic research where we're trying to understand, theming up our insights, we then use those to propel a design process that is with people at every step of the journey, from designing the next idea to testing that idea to bring it back in-house to redesign with people to then go back out to test with people. And
exactly the way that it should be.
Exactly. And when you see that working, you're kind of like, I can't go back to ever doing what I was doing before, because I don't believe in it anymore. Like I think it was really missing the whole point. And I think I did good work in Heart Black for all those years, but I think maybe in the commercial world, it's a massive step up from what they currently do, which is just like dictate what people need and want. But at the same time, it wouldn't cut it in the world of social innovation. And I've kind of fallen in love with the work. I absolutely love it. So passionate about it. But it has been a massive learning journey. This has been the kind of, I guess, 4 years of most intensive learning that I've ever done. 4 of the most stressful years I've ever had. And strangely though, I wouldn't change any of that.
That feeling.
So it's kind of like, you know, I love this work. It's the work I want to do, but I also have a responsibility now to keep myself healthy and build the mechanisms and structures in our organization that keep my colleagues healthy too. And so, yeah, a lot of the work I have done has been about building a different culture in the organization, so doing a lot of culture change work. So that's the kind of internal work, and then the external work has been largely focused in social health. So domestic family violence has been a big focus of mine, doing a lot to understand the health needs and priorities within South Australia itself. And now I'm working on a massive 10-year philanthropically funded initiative, which is looking at community-led mental health and well-being responses. So in the absence of, you know, medical practitioners, how do communities actually support their own mental health and well-being, activating all the assets that they already have? So
and absolutely crucial at this particular point in time.
It is, and it's such an exciting piece of work. I'm actually, yes, I'm facilitating all the towns coming together. So we've got 6 towns who are all involved now. That's been a process whittling down from like 20 to about 6. And we've got the all-time convening this afternoon where we're going to be learning from each other. But yeah, it's so yeah, I love the work we do. How have I actually got there? I would say is I've taken my whole career has been intuitive by nature, but not just like falling into it. I actively pursue what I want to do. So I knew that I wanted to move more into the social space. I had made connections in the social space in Western Australia where I was working at Heart Black. So I had been involved with the Centre for Social Impact over there for a couple of years, just supporting them on their work. So I would just say, yeah, I'll come for free and, like, you know, watch these processes. And it was actually through a connection there that I got the interview at TACSI. So one of the people I worked with there was like, oh, you're moving to Adelaide, you should speak to TACSI. I know someone over TACSI, like, go in and do that. And it took a couple of conversations and things, but I guess that intuitive moving is not just deciding I want to work in that area. It's also then, for me, being a massive reader, I just go and read like everything. So like all the books written on social innovation that I could find, all the books on. So at the moment, the organizational development work we're doing is all for networked and teal organizations. So I had to go and learn what they were, what they looked like.
So this is because one of the questions I was going to ask you was like, where did you get your skills from? And, how did you decide what you needed to work on as a skill to do the work that you did? I think it's a really crucial point that you made in terms of like kind of knowing where roughly you wanted to go. You didn't exactly have a role in mind, but you knew you wanted to work, in this kind of environment and using this kind of type of approach, but that's kind of it. And then you kind of funneled your way slowly towards there. But it sounds like a lot of it was kind of self-education and reading.
Yes, so the majority of it. I've done like when I first started my business, well, actually a couple of years before I started my business, I did a free online course by IDEO, IDEO.org, who are a social design thinking organization, and they have an introduction to human-centered design course. So I had done that. It's free. It gives you all the kind of basics of human-centered design. I guess just the way that my career had evolved, I was doing a lot of facilitation because I didn't believe in this whole kind of like, you tell me what you want as a brand, and I go away and I come back with a whole bunch of ideas. So, I actually sold, and you'd have seen on the Euan Black website that I sold it all as kind of like group sessions, the product of which would be the brand, not, you tell me what you want and then I go away and design it. So I was very different to what other branding consultants were offering. Okay. So I had done a hell of a lot of facilitation over that 7 years, and like one of the things TACSI did kind of in my interview was like, okay, facilitate us through a design process. And I've always like, that is my if I had a superpower, it's like having people feel comfortable and at ease in group settings and being very relaxed about my approach. So unfortunately, the way that I'm very relaxed about my approach is to over prepare to like the nth degree. So I like literally
I can relate to that.
I spend like hours preparing for like, maybe we're meeting people for an hour and a half, and I have spent like half a day getting everything sorted exactly the way I want it. But then I'm also very happy to abandon it when I'm there based on how I feel. So I think I'm very in tune with the vibe in the room.
So what kind of things would you like prepare for in that kind of setting? Like what are sort of the key areas that you would sort of need to do some research in to know where to go with facilitating that?
So I mean, I always start with relationships. So how do you actually bring a group of people together who may never have met each other, and in the space of 3 hours have them produce something meaningful? Like, that's no small feat, but the only way you can do it, as far as I'm concerned, is to build robust relationships from the outset. So I always start with, some kind of fun icebreaker that helps people see who's in the room, help them understand them a little bit. And I always end with them like reflecting on, I guess, an experience they've had of working together that was really good, and one that was not so good, and why it was good or why it was bad. And from that, we then have a conversation as a collective around how we're going to create a space today and hold each other accountable to that space. We create group agreements. I think that they're so important, also for addressing, the power inequities that often exist. We'll often have, CEOs and stakeholders from across the health system in the same room as people with lived experience who are, at the intersections of many disadvantages, so extremely marginalized. How does their voice count and be heard at the same level as the CEO who's paying for the thing. So making sure that people are dressed casually, that they're not bringing in anything, so no black binders sat on the table and laptops or iPads, that they're not wearing anything that's branded, that they all just get given a plain sticker with just their first name and their pronouns on it. And I find that pronouns are actually an incredible way of having everybody, because so many people don't really understand why pronouns are important. So bringing people in and making the first thing they do understand the importance of using people's pronouns is such a leveler, because everyone in that room is probably a little unsure about why that's important, unless you're working in that space specifically.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so doing that, I find, is a great way to neutralize power imbalances, because suddenly we're all on the same page. We're all having to respect something that we've not potentially understood fully. Can you just give me 1 second? I've been drinking copious amounts of water this morning. That'll be 1 second. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. And I have also wanted to say a couple of times, just considering how busy you would have been with some of the projects that you've mentioned that are obviously very crucial at this particular point in time, and that you're juggling lots of different things, and that you've been sick. I really, really appreciate you engaging with me, because you didn't have to. And I know you're sort of a people person, and you're interested in sort of learning about different things, but it really is really very valuable for me to have these conversations. So
no problem at all. I guess it's the paying it forward thing. Like I don't think I would be doing what I'm doing today if I hadn't had the ability to. And I'm very much like yourselves. I was the person who sent all these LinkedIn messages and was like, hey, can we have a coffee, or can I chat with you at some point?
yeah.
That was how I found my way into the social space in Western Australia. So literally just looking on LinkedIn and connecting with people and just saying, can I buy you a coffee? I'm doing this. I'm really interested in doing this. And I just found that in almost 100% of cases, people were like, sure. People want to talk about their experience and share their journey. And
yeah. I've been really surprised by that, because, obviously, it was a very random contact that I made with you. I actually had to sign up for the LinkedIn Premium trial so that I could access you. But I've contacted a few other people from sort of psychology research recently, and I contacted 4 people from the same organization because I didn't know that any of them would actually respond. And they've all responded. So I was kind of trying to cast a wide net, because, you can feel the sense of rejection and that kind of thing when you don't hear back, and it can kind of impact your ability to move forward with it. So I was trying to kind of guard against that a little bit. But yeah, people are very generous with their time when you sort of make that initial connection. And I guess tell them a little bit about you and what you would like to learn.
yeah.
So it's interesting to know that you took a similar approach.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just taking some notes when you took a break for a minute, and I sort of in summary, I guess, for your journey, it's you had this goal, and it was kind of quite intuitive of where you wanted to move towards, and it didn't necessarily require formal qualifications. I guess if I do share this, for example, I think that's a really important thing to highlight.
My only formal qualification is a Bachelor of Design Honours degree in graphic design and communications. So that's my only formal education. I think what's really interesting at TACSI in particular is, we invest so much and believe so strongly in lived experience, that we're actually in the process of now designing all of our stuff to actually understand what people's lived experience is at the same time as their professional experience or their educational experience. Because I think about what has actually helped me the most working and doing what I do now. And it is the fact that I spent, 8 years in therapy. Like, that has been the most useful experience as a way of relating and understanding mental health, and a way of relating and understanding the impact of conditions on your life. And I'm very open about sharing that. All of my colleagues know that, not but because I actually really believe we need to start validating lived experience as valuable, if not more valuable, than the experiences we gain through education or employment.
I could not agree more.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. And I think it's important to be, it takes a degree of courage and vulnerability just to admit those kinds of things. And I'm in exactly the same place as you. I've been in therapy for a number of years as well. And I now, I'm sure it's probably annoying to some of the people around me because I always relate everything back to psychology, but it literally is a component for everyone. And I think it's just so crucial to learn about yourself and how you relate to things, and it gives you such a better understanding. I've developed such deeper empathy from people of different backgrounds because I can now not just see the surface level, but I can, even if I don't know them and I don't understand their story, I feel like I can get a sense of what might have contributed to where they are.
Yeah.
And I met my partner in this time as well, and he's a mental health peer practitioner. So when you were talking about the importance of peer approaches with some of the stuff that TACSI does, and teaching people that have had the same lived experiences through their interviewing how to do the research, rather than teaching researchers how to interact with someone that's experienced something that they haven't. I think that's really, really important. And it'd be super interesting if every company kind of embraced lived experience as a component of resumes and interviews.
100%. But it's got to start somewhere. So we'll start with TACSI. That will be a component. And of course, lived experience is something that someone has to feel safe to disclose. So it's never going to be something like, you have to tell us this. But I think once people have been in our culture for a little while, it becomes very safe to say these things, and we talk about them all openly, and there's no penalization for taking a mental health day, for example. Like, actually, you often get people like, I've had like colleagues when I've said, I'm taking a mental health day on Tuesday, who would just say, oh my God, like I didn't think I could actually say that that's what I was going to do. So I would just take a sick day or something. And I'm like, no, that's exactly like those mental health days.
Blanket days.
Yeah.
My housemates, I was like, I'm having a blanket day.
And we all need them. And I think it's important that we feel that it's okay to take them. But that is all about organizational culture, like a culture where it's okay for that to be the case.
So that was going to be one of my questions, actually, and you've sort of answered it now by indicating that you were in therapy for 8 years, because it seems like your approach to facilitating some of these groups and making people feel comfortable and building those relationships to sort of get the most out of people, it requires a large degree of knowledge of psychology, and I was wondering where you got that from, but now I understand.
Yeah. So do an hour a week for 8 years, you're gonna have some understanding, I hope.
I'm at about 3 years now, so you've got 5 on me, but yeah, I can't imagine where I would be in another 5 years. That's insane.
Well, I guess the thing is, it also helps you understand that most things in our life are cycles, and so you might think that you're completely over something, and then out of nowhere, the pattern, you'll just suddenly like find that kind of rut in your brain again, and you'll be like, oh my God, did I just do that? Like, I know so much better than that. What am I thinking? But for me, that builds a lot of empathy for, like
People suffering with
cycles.
addiction.
Yeah. And, like even people who return to violence over and over again, that you have to understand that is a pattern for them. That's something that has actually created, weirdly, safety in their head. Like, and
that to say exactly the same thing. It's safe and it's familiar.
exactly. It's not safe because it's safe. It's safe because it's familiar. It's something that they understand. It's something that they know. And I know I'm one of those terrible people. I'll sit down to watch some trash on television to escape, like the Real Housewives or something, and then I'll be watching an episode on domestic violence. I'm like, why are you saying that? Like, what are you doing? Like, come on.
Oh my God, I did the exact same thing. Did you watch the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that exact same thing. And with Taylor, and they're doing like end of season thing, and some of the women are like, why are you going back to him? And yeah, I do the exact same thing. I'm like, you don't understand. Like,
I was just like, I couldn't believe that there wasn't a professional there to actually sit and say, okay, look, I understand why you're saying that, but I think it's important that we understand for Taylor's safety, why that's a really inappropriate thing to say right now.
Yeah, it makes it difficult to watch for me now, because that was totally my like escape thing. And then I find myself always trying to find the underlying psychological things that are going on in everything that I watch now. And it's amazing because it's interesting, but it makes it hard to switch off.
It does. And I think that, like yourself, just being interested in most things, like it makes it hard to switch off full stop.
Definitely.
But I think just I think for me, walking is a really important thing. Meditation is really important. Like when I do meditation, I feel so much better, but it's been weeks since I last meditated. Like just doing it for me though is still not a natural habit. It still feels like
I'm
a
the
task
same.
or a checklist item. It doesn't feel like this is something that brings a lot of value to my life, even though I know it does. It's just I've not managed to find the pattern to ingrain that yet.
I've tried to embrace it since the second stage 3 restrictions have been put in place for us, and I'm the same. Like I got into it during my PhD because I needed different things to help me relieve stress. I never thought that I would get into yoga and meditation and all these things that I used to think were really like woo-woo, like I'm a hard scientist, but it's so important. And I've known that I should do it and have the habit of doing that. And my therapist is always like, I know we always bang on about this, but you should be meditating. But I have noticed the last few days that I've been doing it just before bed. I know I always sleep better, but the one thing that it's really helped with is like having that, being in touch with your emotional self as you're reading media content, or as you're having a phone conversation with someone and they're telling you, my grandma's in hospital, for example. Like just being in contact with that part of yourself permanently is something that I think meditation allows for. So I know we're sort of running out of time. So I guess maybe 2 final, hopefully quick questions. So it seems like you built on a lot of your natural skills to sort of move into this. You obviously had skills and interest in design and skills and interest in people. I wonder, because something that I've felt with my journey has been a little bit that I've often tried to fit square peg round hole. And I understand that's a really good area for learning and growth, I guess. But have you found that there have been a number of things that haven't sort of come to you as naturally, that you've had to try and grow to have that become part of your skill set? And do you think that's important, or do you think it's important to focus on moving towards the things that sort of intuitively come to you and keep that as the major focus?
So I think
It's an easy question to finish on.
I think both, and actually though. So sorry to be. I would say career-wise, intuition has guided, and the dominant amount of time I've spent is building on my own strengths.
Yeah.
I think you can waste a lot of time building skills around things that you really don't love and that you're never going to be brilliant at. That said, a really big shift for me coming into this world is the writing of reports. So when I was at Euan Black, I never wrote a single report. In fact, the last report I wrote was at university, So coming to TACSI, where we now just by default of having the government as clients and having not-for-profits as clients, they have an expectation that every project is wound up with a report. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that will be no challenge for you. For me, that was a massive challenge because, quite honestly, to this day, I don't believe reports are very useful. I actually think they're a massive waste of money and time. I think it's important to capture the learnings, but I think there are ways that can make, and this comes from my graphic design background, like I'm not just saying this, the majority of reports that I've written, I could capture it on like a A2 poster with diagrams and with like the key stuff pulled out, and then by all means have a Word document that accompanies it with more detail. But I reckon if we had invested in creating something that visually told a compelling story and brought the really important information to the fore, that we'd actually see more change. So like so much of that information gets buried in like a single paragraph that's not even highlighted as this is what you need to read, and this is what you need to change. So much of it gets completely lost. And I don't see the point in producing a report with like 300 recommendations. I'm like, what are your top 5? Like, we'll give people a friggin' chance.
Agree with that, definitely. Like, I mean, it just makes me think of handover documents, for example, when like someone's moving into your role and you spend all this time as the exiting person to give them all this information, but the amount of time you're spending is potentially not that. It's not time well spent necessarily, because that person won't necessarily read the document, like they won't get the major learnings out of it. Like so it sort of just makes me think of that. So I do agree.
They won't even understand, or they'll misinterpret what you've written, because I think writing and language are so so open to interpretation. Whereas I feel like when you draw something, the interpretation is clearer. Like it's clear what you mean when something is really kind of. So I spend a lot of times, if you go on the TACSI website, if there's an illustration, it's something that I've done, because I'm just like, guys, come on, like it could be so much simpler. So I actually feel that there's a massive strength that I brought by having that graphic design background.
Absolutely.
Which I didn't see as a strength when I first arrived. I just believed that, everything I had previously done didn't have value in this new setting. And so I needed to sit back and just let everyone else speak. And it took me about a year to actually really use my voice at TACSI and to actually say, oh, I actually have something to say on this, and I think it's valuable now.
Yeah. And I agree with everything, like honestly, everything that you've said. And even when I read your sort of LinkedIn about section and that kind of thing, I think like you have a lot of really important things to say and a lot of really important and crucial innovations to put into, this is obviously why you're so good at organizational development, because you are thinking outside the box and like trying not to just fit into what has been the historical structure, and really kind of, I guess, using some of that co-design that you've learned like in changing organizational development as well.
Yeah, so we're currently
really
we're currently looking at how people progress and are remunerated at TACSI, and we're doing a co-design process. And one of my colleagues showed up to the first session with all these like like she'd been really looking into ecosystems and how ecosystems allow things to progress. And she showed up with this like air pressure chart, and she was like, if we think about like people progressing from an area of high pressure to low pressure, that change in pressure affects everyone around them. How do we start thinking about people progressing into new areas, and then what pressure that creates in different areas? So how do we start mapping all the different dynamics that shift when someone progresses in their career? And that for me was just like, oh my God, I have like this whole new way of like imagining career progression. And that can really play into us knowing how to better support people as they progress and support those around them who the burden also shifts. So like as one person progresses, actually everyone progresses, because, and I think that's something that's missed in most organizations.
Yeah.
Like you're just taking on more responsibility, whereas actually, no, those people who are now left back in the role that they were in are going to have to absorb some of that as well. And so progression is actually a group activity as opposed to an individual one. And
yeah, that's such a good point. That's so interesting, the way that you came to that.
Yeah. So we're working on that right now, but that just gives you a little kind of idea of how we explore these types of things. We certainly don't just think, oh, this is how it's done elsewhere, let's do that here. It's what do we actually need? Like, what do people feel? And we're moving away from a model where people would actually outline their own progression, and one that actually pools people. So using like an eldership kinship system, how do the elders in the organization continue to know who needs what input, who needs what, and how are they being pulled forward in directions that are aligned with where they want to go, but not putting all the pressure on people to actually say, I deserve a promotion and $10,000, you know, like.
I wish someone like you could come and work in the academic sphere, because we need like a total upend of the way that everything's done.
Yeah, I think the world needs a total upend.
Well, yeah, that's probably true.
So I actually think these kind of second waves are quite important for the world, because I think everyone after the first wave of COVID was really like, how do we just get back to the way things were? And now everyone's like, okay, it's not really possible to go back to the way things were. We actually have to really
need to change
what we have to change. So I'm hoping that the good thing to come out, the silver lining of a second wave, is
innovation,
change.
It makes me think about I wish I could remember the name of the Netflix series, but there's a Netflix series where there's a woman, she works at the like design and media lab at MIT, and it's just this idea of like just really thinking outside the box. She came from I think architecture, and then she studied medicine, and she ended up heading this this research group at MIT, and they're looking at using natural materials to design buildings in a sustainable way. But they also, so they'll end up on the front page of Nature, which is a major international medical journal, because of the innovative science that they're doing. But then they also end up getting commissioned to have some of their designs put into major art museums across the world.
Wow.
So, like at this intersection of engineering and biology and architecture, and she encourages people to come to her with new ideas all the time. And she doesn't want, like, she wants people to be able to be dynamic with their approaches, and they could be going down one path and then discover something and need to veer off, and not be told to just know, like, this was the plan, like, stick to the plan. Like they switch it.
That's like, you know, the nature, if you want to do anything in a systems change space, you need to work with emergence. Like you can't ignore what emerges and just go back to your plan. And I think that's what creates such a kind of rub between traditional scientific methodologies and developmental methodologies like we use. So we would call our approach action learning. So you learn by doing, and you don't just keep doing when something's not working. You actually have to change it or scrap it completely.
Yeah.
And that requires you to really embrace failure, because if you aren't okay with failure, you're never going to be okay with innovation.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a bunch of mindsets that I think are really important to bring in. So I would definitely research innovation mindsets and think about how to bring those into life. My friend Kellyanne has just written a book called Beyond Sticky Notes.
Okay.
Which is all about co-design. So I recommend that. I think it comes out next week. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, I know you've got another meeting now, so I'll totally wrap it up. And
I'm actually off to the doctor. So
oh no.
Well, I've been sick for like a week, so I was like, let's actually go and see what this is. Make sure it's not COVID.
Yeah.
Laugh. That's terrible. Sorry.
I hope it's nothing serious, and I hope you got better soon. But yeah, like I said, I found this really valuable. I really, really appreciate you engaging. I would love to stay connected and keep in touch. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I've loved it. I've had a really good time, and I've learned a lot. I've taken notes. I think this will actually be valuable for other people that are in a similar sort of place to me with looking into their career, because we get so stuck in academia about the limited options that are available to us. And we actually develop a lot of skills, like dealing with constant failure, for example. We just have to do that as part of our job. And I think a lot of people in academia don't understand how crucial that is outside of academia and how it can be applied for innovation. So yeah, really interesting learning about this, because it sounds similar to UX design, which is another thing that I'm interested in, and I think has a lot of similar skills to what PhD students learn. So just another avenue that I will definitely keep my eye on. So thank you.
No worries. Have a lovely rest of your day, Emily, and lovely to meet you.
Yeah, you too. All right, thank you. Get better soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.